There are significant changes in California when it comes to gasoline and oil supply. A lot of Californians don't have a positive perspective of oil, but they use gasoline every day in their cars. There is a huge discrepancy between the national prices of gasoline versus the state level. It's reaching about 50% now. And with some of these refineries shutting down, the prices could spike up significantly. Today, we go over what's the perspective of Californians on oil and gas, how the prices could get impacted, why people should care about the gasoline and oil infrastructure in California, and what type of innovations are being made in the state currently by this industry. We are not proposing for you to like or not like the gas and oil space. We just want you to be informed, so if things change and shift significantly in the state, you know what's going on. Let's check out this conference. What's going to happen when these refineries shut down? Do we have to import? And what does that look like, Professor Mische?
Well, we're losing 20 to 21% of our in-state production from 2023 to 2026. Our first refinery is shutting down this October, and the second one is going to be in April. So effectively, they're both shut down come January 1. Collectively, that's 20% of in-state gasoline production. Put it in terms, that's about 9 million gallons of gasoline a day that will not be produced in the state of California. So the issue then becomes, where does the state get that gasoline from? What's the source? What's the greenhouse effect? And what's the cost? And so as we're losing these refineries, and these will be the first two. If something drastic is not done, we'll lose another two very quickly after that. Is a significant burden on the California consumer, the California family, because there'll be a shortage, honestly, of gasoline in the state because of the loss of these two refineries. So it'll have a relatively devastating impact, not only on the infrastructure of energy in our state, fossil fuel energy, but also a profound impact on the growth of California's economy.
Now, do you think this will get shipped here or other refineries can produce more? How would it look like?
Well, it's a little complex in California because we have something called the California Special Blend. And so our gasoline is very unique to our state. And there's reasons for that because it helps with the air quality and elimination of tailpipe emissions or mitigation thereof. So it's not like we can knock on the door of any refinery and have California gasoline built. As a matter of fact, there's only 3 to 5 refineries in the world that can build California gasoline. Interesting, most of them are overseas. So there are sources in Singapore, South Korea, China, and potentially India to make up for the gasoline shortage. That means we'll be importing 10 million gallons of gasoline a day, every day, across the Pacific Ocean from places like China. Now, interesting, if indeed California sources gasoline from China, and I'm not saying it will or we will, but if indeed we do, then the oil that's used to make that gasoline is produced in Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. So in a way, if sourcing gasoline from China, that would be a different way of supporting those rogue regimes. On the other hand, if we get the gasoline from, say, Singapore, the perversion there is Singapore gets its gasoline from the Middle East and the United States. So we could be exporting California oil to Singapore, have the gasoline made there, and then bringing it back to the United States. So it's going to be a very difficult, complex equation. And keep in mind, any disruption in that supply chain will cause a severe reaction in the price of gasoline here. For example, I flew in today from Houston. When I got on the plane, oil was $5 a barrel less than it was when I got off the plane. That equates to about 13 cents a gallon just today in gasoline prices. So we're more vulnerable, not only for our foreign oil, which is about 63% of oil comes from non-U.S. producers. The majority of that oil is going to come from Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Brazil, and we've talked about the impact on human rights and also the forests and Amazon jungles. Very important impact. We've seen reductions in glacier size as a result of deforestation in the Amazon, attributed with oil production of some of these nations there. So the question then becomes, what is the correct strategy for California? Should California continue to be completely dependent on foreign sources of oil and now completely dependent on foreign sources of gasoline? Or should we harvest our incredible abundance of oil that we have in state and preserve the refineries? That's the question.
And do we have the capability to do that if we were to do that?
As far as produce oil in the state, absolutely. California has more oil per square meter than any other place in the world, right? And we have a unique situation in California geologically. Because we have the San Andreas Fault system, which extends along the coast, and we have the greatest generator of oil. I don't know if those in the audience understand how oil is made, but it might be useful. Oil just doesn't fall off trees. I mean, palm oil does, but oil is generated deep underground, probably somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 feet. And in California, we have a rock called the Monterey Formation. And the Monterey Formation has been active for millions of years and will continue to be active for many millions in the future. And it essentially expulses oil every day. So even though California thinks that it's produced a bunch of oil, our reservoirs are continually refilling from the Monterey, which is essentially expulsing oil, which rises not only up to our oil reservoirs, but rises all the way up to the surface and comes out as oil leaks all throughout California, from San Diego all the way up to Cape Mendocino. And in fact, all the oil fields in California, the large ones in particular, were discovered not based on good geology or anything like that. They were discovered based on natural seeps, and they still seep today.
So it's coming to the surface?
Yeah, when you look at the history of California, it's really interesting. The oil industry, exactly right. It's entrepreneurs, it was the conquistadors, and and looking and finding oil. I mean, the oil was at the surface, and the largest is La Brea tar pits, perhaps, right? So oil is quite abundant, and it literally flowed out of the ground and still does.
You know, one thing I'll mention in relation to the question about the industry and whether the industry can ramp back up and produce more oil, one of the problems we're seeing in California is that the infrastructure, if you will, of firms that are qualified to do drilling, for example, it's not just refineries that we're talking about. The drillers themselves are moving to Brazil or they're moving to Texas, and we risk having sort of a collapse in the industry, which is similar to what happened with timber in California. You know, timber harvesting in California is 1/4 the harvest that it was in the 1990s. And as a result, if you just all of a sudden said, well, we're going to save our forests and log again, you'd have to get equipment leases, you'd have to have long-term contracts, you'd have to have all kinds of guarantees of stability for a revived industry so that investment would be stimulated, but you'd also just have the physical challenge of getting all of that equipment and training all of those employees again and attracting all these companies back to California to do that work. So what we're seeing with the oil industry could be very well what's happened to the timber industry, where it's going to get below a critical mass. And even if there was reforms and we wanted to start drilling again, it would be very hard to do it overnight. You'd have to rebuild the industry.
Do you think this is happening with the refineries? If these 2 refineries shut down, it's hard to get them back up?
Well, the thing with the refineries is they've already taken billions of dollars of charge-offs on their financial statements. So, they've taken billions of dollars in advance of shutting down. So the question then becomes, how are they going to reverse those write-offs? They're already in the process of shutting down. So I think it would be almost sheer folly to think they're going to stay in the state, that somehow you're going to entice them. Now, we have recommended things like an investment tax credit, relief of regulations, things like that to try to create a more attractive environment to retain them. But I would say with a high degree of confidence, they're leaving. Now, but the point is great because it's not just the refineries. The oil industry, it's a really complex and cool industry. I mean, you have a lot of service providers, drill rigs, skilled. We talked a little bit about the labor that's in this industry. The salaries are 25 to 35% higher than the average salary because of the skill required to work in this industry. Those workers are going to leave. Those rigs are going to leave. And this becomes very, very important for us with the sub-infrastructure to support the refineries and the production. So this is a profound moment, I think, in policy for the state.
If we lose this refinery infrastructure, because this is an infrastructure, these big buildings that we see when we're driving by, and there's a lot that's going on in them, and if they're gone, what will happen? How hard is it to get them back?
Well, it'd be very hard to get them back for a lot of reasons that we've already discussed. The future of the state, the promise of a good business environment, the promise of government on reduction of regulation and interference with the operation. It would be hard to get them back. If you're going to get them back, it has to be now before they completely shut down and shutter their plant. Because when they shutter their plant, it's not just the refinery that's going to get shuttered. It's going to be the storage capacity, the inbound pipe capacity, the port capacity to take the oil from the tanker. There's a lot of things that will be shuttered. All right, and the only thing that will survive is probably just a few storage tanks for the gasoline that's produced. And so the time to try to reanimate that process and resurrect it would be right now. Because if you wait until they shut, they're not coming back. There's no economic reason for them to cut back. They've taken the economic hit. It's not too late to probably reverse that. But after they're out, they're out.
There's a mindset in the state that we don't need this industry. We're going to go all electric. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, if you look at the amount of energy that goes into California, the total inputs, and Lawrence Livermore Lab does a really interesting flow chart showing this. It's 50% petroleum. It's 30%, very rough numbers, natural gas. You know, this is 80% of our total energy inputs. In the world, it's about 82%. United States is about 82%. So we're just marginally better, despite all of the investment we've already made. And if you want to electrify the economy, you know, let me throw out some numbers. You know, we're talking about roughly 7 quadrillion BTUs, British thermal units. And thermal is a reference to combustion and heat. If you measure energy in electrons, that's a little over 2 million gigawatt hours, okay? We didn't even hit, in terms of our electricity consumption in California, 300,000 gigawatt hours. So you're looking at about, 15%, which is electricity right now. Now, it is true that you can do some things more efficiently with electricity. Certainly an electric car, for example, it's more efficient than an internal combustion engine in terms of taking energy inputs and turning it into horsepower. But nonetheless, you're still going to have to get to, let's say, 1.5 million gigawatt hours from 300,000. And that 300,000 is only about 1/4 of that solar and wind. So if you want to run all those numbers, what you're looking at is everywhere you see a solar farm or a wind farm, multiply by 20. And that's the infrastructure we'd have to construct to electrify the state with renewable energy. And of course, you have all the rest of the so-called balance of plant. You'd have to have battery farms, and you'd have to have transmission lines. So, I'm a fan of all forms of energy. If let's not subsidize these technologies and let's let them compete. But you aren't going to get to 1.5 million gigawatt hours, especially with solar and wind, overnight. And in the meantime, we're crushing 80% of our sources of energy, which is the petroleum and natural gas.
I teach a class in the energy transition at Berkeley, discussing essentially how to do it, how long it's going to take, what are the motivations. And there's a huge movement, particularly in academia, that says that we can do everything with renewables. But when you look at the practical aspects of how long and what magnitude that'll take, I'll just give you one Easy number. One decent natural gas well in America produces about the same amount of energy as 200 wind turbines operating for 20 years. So in order to replace 82% of our energy with petroleum, you can imagine the amount of equipment, the amount of mining, and not to say that it can't be done, but this is going to be a huge undertaking, and it's going to take centuries. We're still using coal today.
I was in Washington, and I sat in on a presentation on small nuclear reactors, and it was really interesting. I'm not a nuclear reactor guy. I think they're cool, but I don't know anything about them. But the footprint for the reactor was 2.5 acres. The equivalent footprint for a solar farm was 525 acres.
You know, if you want to talk about footprints, talk about floating offshore wind. I'm appalled that the state of California is seriously considering this. They want to have 25 gigawatts of output, which even at a 40% yield, where the wind's blowing 40% of the time, is 10 gigawatts of baseload power. And each of the biggest wind turbines that we've got to float offshore would be about a 10 megawatt turbine. So to get 25 gigawatts of output, you'd need 2,500 of these floating offshore. 2,500, a 10 megawatt wind turbine is 1,000 feet, 900 to 1,000 feet from the water line to the tip of the rotor when it's in a vertical position. 900 to 1,000 feet. That's the Eiffel Tower. That's 3 Statues of Liberty from the water line to the tip of the torch, stacked on top of each other. 2,500 of these. And of course, they would have to float. So they'd have to have pontoons underneath, and they'd have to be tethered to the ocean, which they're planning on doing at 20 miles out for aesthetic reasons, and I suppose because they're worried about the immediate ecosystems close to the coast. So you'd have 20 miles of undersea cable in 4,000 feet of water, high voltage cables, from 2,500 of these things. That's bigger than a supercarrier laid on its side, and you'd have 2,500 of them. You want to talk about the resources that are involved, but also the environmental destruction and the cost for something like this.
I really would love to see us be able, I wish that solar had more energy density. I wish that we could do this. I think we all want as clean an energy system as we can. But, you know, we've got to stop being so Pollyannish. We've got to start living in reality, and we're not.
And we're not optimistic about internal combustion engines and synthetic liquid fuels, which have a future as well. So where's the faith in that technology at the same time?
If you like watching California Insider and you like our coverage, you will like the newspaper Epoch Times. This newspaper is covering a lot of issues we're covering, and they're talking to multiple people from different sides, and they're trying to bring everybody's perspective inside it. In the California section, there are a lot of interesting stories. This week's edition has a story about a county supervisor in Orange County who's going to go to prison for 5 years for misusing COVID funds. There are a lot of other stories that you got to check out in the paper. You can always subscribe. We have a special deal for you. You can get it at $1 per week for the first month to check it out. It's digital, and you can also get the weekly print. You can click on the link below and subscribe. Now let's go back to our discussions. So essentially what you're saying is that we have this infrastructure in the state, in the oil and gas system. We want to change that. We want to completely scrap it and get a new system in place that might not really do what we anticipated to do, or what we need.
A couple points on that, because I know my colleagues have colleagues have some real opinions on that. But first, we have the best oil and gas industry in the United States right here. We have the best plants, we have the best refineries, we have the best operators. They operate with the most stringent standards in place, the most stringent regulations in place, and we have the best people. You go out into these fields and you talk to these people that are working in the fields, they're working on the pipelines, they're working on the rigs, they're working in the corporate office. These are highly dedicated people. It's a calling. They understand that the oil that's produced today is going to get somebody to work in 2 weeks. That's what they understand. And they are completely dedicated to that. And our operators are the best, from the biggest to the smallest independents. We have great independent operators in this state. You get out there, you start talking to those independent operators, and you understand just how committed they are to the future of California. At the same time, they understand 100 years from now, we don't want petroleum to be the primary source of energy. We understand that. But I can't crash the economy just simply because, 2035 seems like a good year to get rid of gas cars. It's absurd. You don't have the infrastructure for it, and you're going to blow up the economy in the process. Plus, you're forcing the market, Soviet-style economics. You got to do it by mandate and edict. So I think that is one of the huge issues that we have here. Second, it takes $5 billion to build a refinery, if you can build one, if you could get the permits. I mean, I could maybe apply for the permit, and maybe my great-grandson might get the approval. But it certainly won't occur in my lifetime. So you got a $5 billion problem. So, when you hear the state will take over the refineries and operate it, yeah, take a look at Venezuela. All right, if you want to see how the state can't build a railroad. How are they going to operate a refinery? So, very interesting, but I've taken too much time because I know my colleagues have a lot to say on this one.
I'll be real quick, but when you talk about infrastructure, it's of course not just our energy infrastructure, it's our water infrastructure, it's our transportation infrastructure. And if you look at the remarkable infrastructure we've got in California, the water infrastructure is second to, even now with all the neglect over the last 50 years, it's one of the biggest interbasin water transfer systems in the world. It's incredible, but none of this could ever be built today. If you tried to build what we have and what we enjoy and what we're benefiting from today, whether it's freeways or aqueducts or refineries, none of it could happen in the permitting environment that rules Sacramento right now.
But when you look at what California has in terms of an oil and gas asset, and let's assume that it's going to be gone in 100 years, why wouldn't we take advantage of it when it has value? Why wouldn't we exploit it now, especially if we can do it in ways that are actually benefiting the environment? And there's a bunch of work that I'm involved in doing right now that suggests that, believe it or not, we've had it all wrong for the last 10 or 20 years, and that producing oil may actually reduce emissions in California.
Can you explain that? Can you expand that?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about the Monterey Formation and seeps. Seeps have been around forever, and studies have shown, for example, in La Brea tar pits and Coal Oil Point in Santa Barbara, that seeps are roughly around 100 to 1,000,000 times more energetic in volatile organic compounds and in greenhouse gases than the equipment on wellheads. So everybody looked at oil fields and they said, oh, geez, there are all these emissions coming from oil fields. Well, that's true from the vicinity, but they made the inference that because they were correlated with the oil fields, that they must be coming from the equipment. And that's false. That we know now, based on many measurements that have been done over the past thing, there's minimal emissions from equipment. But the emissions are still there. Well, they're coming from the seeps. What happens when you have these seeps? It's basically causing cancer. It's causing disproportionate cancer in areas with oil fields because of the seeps again, not because of the equipment.
So you're saying it's naturally occurring?
It's naturally
even
occurring.
If there was no oil fields there, it would be there anyways?
Even if there was no production,
it would still be there.
Correct. And the scary thing about it is that by stopping production, because this oil is continually being generated, we are actually increasing the seeps and increasing health risks and increasing greenhouse gases. We're doing the anti-environmental thing by stopping oil production. And I don't think that Sacramento understands this. I think if they knew this, they would turn in a heartbeat. unless they're ideologues. But if they really knew the facts, I think that they would change very quickly.
And how unique is California's oil?
There are very, very few places like this in the world. The combination of young, organic-rich rocks like the Monterey Formation, along with the San Andreas Fault system, is like the perfect storm of generating a lot of oil and continuing to generate a lot of oil. And what we're trying to do in my group is try to predict exactly what is California, Southern California in particular, going to be like if we shut in production. We know that earthquakes are related to fluid movement underground. We think that a lot of this is associated with the Monterey and generating fluids along with these seeps. So in fact, by stopping production, we don't know this yet, but you may be increasing the risk of an earthquake.
It is. I'm not going to put you on the spot for the paper because I know you're working on it and I know it's coming out. I can't wait to see it. I would be honored to peer review it. Okay, but I think from what I've heard and what you've told me, this is going to be a seminal piece of knowledge that's coming out. It's going to be very unique, new, revolutionary knowledge that I think is going to warrant national conversation. So can't wait to see it. I know it's on its way, but I'm not going to pin you down. Having written a bunch of papers and missing deadlines, I know what it's like. But I can't wait to see it because I think it's going to be just a phenomenal piece of knowledge that's going to be added to the body of knowledge for policymakers.
We are hearing numbers that the production in California of oil has gone down significantly over the last decade. What's the impact of that?
Well, over the last, say, 30 years, production has declined in the state by 68%. That's in-state oil production, at the well, pumping it out, getting it to a refinery has gone down 68%. And in 2024, we produced about 23% of our needs in state. So 23% of oil that we needed for our energy needs was produced in state. 63 came from non-U.S. sources. Rest came from Alaska and places like that. This year, because of reduction in permits and a lot of other complicated other factors, our in-state production has dropped below 20%. And this is rather alarming. So what that means is we're even more dependent on foreign oil for our refineries. And with the shutdown of 2 refineries, we're going to be more dependent on foreign gasoline sources. So any disruption in that supply chain, like what's happening now in the Middle East, and now you have Taiwan sort of on the horizon that you have to worry about. You got Ukraine that you're always worried about. Any disruption in the supply chain or the price of oil is going to have a direct impact on the California consumer. And so we're just becoming more vulnerable to geopolitical situations and becoming far more vulnerable to the oscillations in the spot price movements for both gasoline and oil.
We're also becoming more vulnerable to an ecological disaster off the California coast because tankers are much more risky than, say, a pipeline in terms of the potential oil spills that could occur off there. More tankers, the most pollution that happens in our California ports in Long Beach and in the Bay is due to oil tanker traffic.
So more and more of it is coming through the port, and then as a result of it, it's creating more pollution.
Well, think about it, right? If we produced offshore, we'd be moving the oil, 5 miles, 3 miles in a secured pipeline, a modern pipeline with a lot of security features, a lot of safety features, virtually zero emissions. So instead of doing that, which, I don't know, makes sense to me, we'd rather go ahead and source gasoline and oil from the Middle East, which means it's going to be on a tanker for 40 days, spewing emissions across the Pacific, and then it's going to have to go into the queue, right, in the port, and it just doesn't make sense. The math doesn't play out that way. Now, interesting, when the California CARB chairwoman was questioned about it, the answer was, we don't make that calculation. We don't do that calculation. So they don't calculate the price of the legislation or the regulation, and they don't calculate the impact of greenhouse gas emissions on the importation of oil from the source. You wouldn't accept this in business. You simply wouldn't.
I don't know the details, but I don't think they incorporate natural emissions, seeps and things like that either in their calculations. I do know that in Santa Barbara in the Channel, we have gone, since we've reduced production in the Channel and shut down a lot of platforms, from oil seeps that emit about 200 barrels a day to over 1,000 barrels a day within 20 years. Now, to give you a scale of that, the Goleta pipeline spill that happened is about 2 days worth of oil seeps in the Santa Barbara Channel.
Now, there is an economical side of all of this too. You have done some studies on this. What's the impact of it when the oil is imported versus if it's produced here?
Well, if it's produced here, it's going to be produced at a lower cost. There's no transportation involved. There's lower handling involved. If indeed you ever have tariffs, there won't be any tariffs involved. So generally, the oil produced here will be sold to the refineries at a discount off of the Brent spot price, and that discount is generally greater than the discount they would get from Saudi Arabian oil that's sold, or Middle Eastern oil that's sold on Brent. So under pretty much every model that we built, it was far more economically favorable to produce oil in our state, put it in a pipeline, ship it to the refinery, then put it, buy it in Saudi Arabia or another foreign country and ship it through the Panama Canal to get it to California. So the economics are, bottom line, far more favorable to produce in the state than importation from a foreign country.
You're also looking at fixed costs with distribution in California. We have a system of pipelines in California that at one time was producing 2 or 3 times or more as much oil as we're producing today. And it's the same system, and you still have the same requirements, fixed cost requirements that are necessary to maintain those pipes and to operate those pipes. And so there's, at some point you could have an economic collapse just of the distribution system where it's so costly to operate them that they can't afford to do it anymore. And where, I don't know where that threshold is, but when you're down to 20%, you're starting to get I've been told by people who are very familiar with this that they're getting into very dangerous territory where there really could be bankruptcies by some of the pipeline operators.
That's a good point. The 20% number that floor was always sort of the caution floor for me. And that goes back 50 years when I first started learning this stuff, and I was in school and we looked at production, curves and things like that. The 20%, when you're below 20, that's a very, very dangerous zone, because that's the zone where an operator, particularly an independent, might sit there and go, you know what, it's just not worth it anymore. And now, boom, you've lost a great independent operator. And that's a scary number. So, I think it's like 17%, the last number I looked at, which was probably a couple days ago. And I'm like, this is not what we want to see right now in California.
So something that Californians may not be paying attention to, when we are buying from other countries, the money is going there. When we are buying from California production companies, the money will come here. What's the impact of that? You've done some studies on this.
Well, I have. Okay, so our oil and gas industry in the state, it's about 8% of the GDP of California. And so people will say 8%, but here's the interesting concept. It's the first 8%. In other words, if you don't have that first 8%, you're not getting the other 92. And that's what's so fundamental about this industry. So when you think about it, it's the first 8%. And if you don't get the first 8, it doesn't matter what you do, because you're not getting the other 92, because without petroleum, we can't make asphalt. We can't make concrete. We can't make steel. I flew in on an airplane today. It burns aviation fuel. Yeah, made out of petroleum. I mean, there it is. That's what it burns. That first 8% is essential. And that's the backbone of the economy, that number right there. You start messing around with it, you're going to have problems. energy costs on whole are about 30 to 30% of whatever the inflation number is. And so you saw that during the Joe Biden administration. The price of gas from the day after the Biden election in 2020 to the day before Putin's invasion of the Ukraine went up 40%. Went up 40%. After the invasion, went up another 38%. But before the invasion, it went up 40%. Why? Because of the rhetoric and the articulated policies that were coming down against the industry. So, and we saw what happened to the economy. So this is really an interesting point in time. I would like to think that Californians are starting to pay attention.
The other thing that we don't consider is that California gets tax revenue, and to the extent that people drill and produce on California lands, they get a royalty. They get 16.75% off the top of any barrel of oil that's produced on state lands. And state lands in Santa Barbara extends 2 miles offshore. That's a lot of money. And when you consider the state budget crisis at the moment, I know at Berkeley we do more with less every year. In Texas, the state of Texas gives the University of Texas system $5 million a day in royalties. And there's no reason why California couldn't do the same if they encourage that before things change.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. And I was just in Texas, and I met with the Texas Energy Commissioner yesterday. By the way, his comment was, "What are you doing in California, Mike?" Like, what are you guys doing out? What are you all doing out there? And it's like, I said, well, he goes, well, we're not doing it here. And I'm like, good, you're smart. But we have the royalties off of that. That's really important. But think of it like this. If you're thinking about what's a wise use of the resource, what's our state debt? What's the debt this year? It's like $50 billion. And then you have that's the deficit. Then you have the debt. Then you have an unfunded pension liability that's like $220 billion.
Yeah, we added all of it up, including the pension liability, and it was a little over $1 trillion.
That's right. That was your number. That was what, 1.6 or something like that, 1.2?
Well, it depends on what discount you use to properly value the pension liability, but it's over $1 trillion.
Yeah, that was your number. Right. I apologize, Ed. I should have known that off the top of my head. But think about that. It's a $1 trillion problem. But yet you were sitting on several $1 trillion of collectible oil.
It's in the bank, and it's going to go away at some point in the future. It's going to not have the value.
Right. It's here right now, and it has tangible, fungible value for us. So if we're looking at good fiscal management, this is a pretty good way of getting out of our budget deficit.
What should Californians do about this?
Become more educated. Become more mindful. Understand, how the numbers are actually built up. One of the things we have, if the price of oil went to zero today across the United States, California would still have the highest gasoline prices because we have the highest regulatory costs. The state makes on July 1st, the state will be making 63 cents a gallon just in the excise tax. That's 6 times more than the gas station owner makes on the same gallon of gas. That's about $9 to $10 billion a year in state revenue just on the excise tax. In addition to that, we layer on, or the state layers on, the seasonal blend. That's about 12 cents a gallon. Lays on the special California blend. Well, the old one was about 17 cents a gallon. Nobody knows what the new one's going to be. It could be, I got it at 60 cents a gallon. CARB had it at 40 cents a gallon, 47, but they retracted it because it was politically unpopular. University of Pennsylvania has it at $1 a gallon. Then we have the underground storage fee. That's only 2 cents. Local and county taxes are about 3%. And now you got cap and trade.
That's right.
The most sinister regulatory cost that's out there because you can't really predict it. And people say, well, it's going to be based on the credits, right? What's the auction? Well, that's true, but it's based on more because these firms, these refiners have to incur capital costs to create the gasoline and some of the other things to be compliant. So you load that in. That's 50 cents a gallon. And then let's see, what's the other one? Oh, the new one. Forgot. There's so much of this stuff. AB2-1, which is the inventory.
Yeah, on the refiners.
The refiner's inventory, right? So that's going to add, I don't know, 7 cents a gallon to that, depending on how many days. We burn 30 million gallons of gas a day. Now, if you're making these refiners keep 15 days of inventory, that's a big number. They're going to have to pay for it, which means it's going to be built in to the pump price. It's the only way you can pay for the holding cost of inventory. I know that some people out here probably own their own business. And, when you have finished goods inventory, it costs you a lot of money to have the finished goods inventory in there until you sell it. That's why we have inventory turnover. You want to turn it over and get it out. Well, gasoline's a little different because you got the seasonal blends. And so this will be quite interesting to see how this plays out. But these are some of the factors that go into these refiners saying, you know what, the heck with it. It's not worth it. I'm out of here.
In terms of what should the average Californian do, I think that there is a need for Californians to be very skeptical about the media in general. And I think that they need to look to media outlets that really are non-denominational. They need to be very careful about left or right leaning media and listening to them. And I would encourage them to try to be as objective and as kind of common sense driven as they can be.
Yeah, the only thing I could add to that is we'd like to see a change in attitude. We've got at least a generation now that's been raised to believe that sacrifice and scarcity is the only way that we can ever achieve a sustainable civilization and cope with climate change. And that's simply false. There are, if you really are concerned about climate change, a lot of these things that we ought to be doing might actually be more urgent. Your point about seeps, for goodness sakes, if you really are concerned about the environment and climate change, then you should be, imagine how heretical that is, but it's the truth. It looks like you're going to prove that we actually should be developing more oil in order to actually reduce our carbon footprint. So that's the kind of thinking that really requires a change in general attitude, which again, we've trained our entire younger generation to think that we have to have scarcity and shortages and sacrifice, and we don't. We don't have to do that. We just need to let the government kind of get out of the way a little bit and have access to more accurate information, but we have to change the attitudes of our younger generation.
One of the things that I see at Berkeley is that the youngest generation, say the last 5 years since COVID coming out, seems to be much more open to new ideas and not nearly as dogmatic and ideological as the generations that preceded them. And that gives me a lot of hope and encouragement. They seem to be willing to listen.
That's the second expression of strategic optimism you've shared with us today. Thank you.
Well, I'd agree with that. I think my students at SC, post-COVID, this group now, particularly these last couple of years, they're wonderfully optimistic and they're wide open. And like you, I teach a class in energy, and they all came up at the end of the semester and they said, "Wow, we didn't know this about oil and gas. We didn't know you need petroleum to make asphalt. We didn't know that. It was like magic, right? And we didn't know that there's a hydrocarbon molecule in our screen of our Apple phone. We didn't know there was a hydrocarbon molecule here and there, and we didn't know any of that stuff. And boy, I understand. Yeah, we need to transition, but we just can't shut the switch off because it doesn't make sense now. So I think that this group of students that we're honored to have in our classrooms, I think, are far more open-minded, as you said, and they want to see the data. The one thing, have you noticed that? The one thing that we're seeing is they want to see the data. They just, it's like, okay, I get it, but let me see the spreadsheet. Let me see the data. Where'd you get the data from? So they're starting to ask those really good questions.
The funny thing is that they're very different from the administration and even many of my colleagues who really do not ever want to see anybody do anything in mining or petroleum again in California, even though petroleum, for example, is 82% still of our energy needs, and mining is essential for solar and wind and everything like that. It's kind of too dirty for California to take on by themselves.
What will happen in California if these couple of refineries shut down? Would we have to ship significant amount of gasoline from across the world to bring them in California? Or will we be able to produce in the state? Or is there another alternative where the state can save these refineries and not let them shut down?
If the other two refineries do actually shut down, I think we'll see $8, possibly $10 a gallon gas. And that's a study that's been done by an individual that has a qualified expertise in this area. And the big fear is that without in-state production, we're never going to be able to fulfill the obligations that the demand has in the state of California. We import oil from foreign countries, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Over 50% of our oil comes from the rainforest in Ecuador, Guyana, and the problem that we have there is that we're bulldozing down the rainforest. We're affecting indigenous Indians that are there. We actually have the Amazon Watch and the Amazon individuals coming to the state capitol on Monday to plead with us not to continue to purchase their oil. We have California purchases about 50% of the oil produced in Ecuador instead of producing it here for Californians by Californians. And that jeopardizes the supply chain and also doesn't address carbon emissions coming from point of origin to point of destination.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, so the other thing is that we need to stop pretending that imported oil is a climate solution. It's actually it's a distraction because California oil is cleaner, it's safer, we produce jobs, we pay taxes, we enhance communities. There are all kinds of benefits that come with local production, and imported oil is not the answer.
So just to add on, the issue is also is that what's the backup plan? When you look at the refineries that are closing, where does LA get its jet fuel? From refineries here in the state of California, the majority of it, almost 80%. So when you think about that, like what's the backup plan for jet fuel? What's the backup plan for in-state production if you continue to drive it out? Because demand has not gone down. Californians still use 1.8 million barrels of oil every single day. And if you're not getting it from California and you're getting it from foreign sources, where, again, we produce the cleanest, most environmentally protected oil, stringent oil ever in the world, I believe. What's their backup plan? And it can't continue to be imports. Well, Californians' buying power has an impact on global security when we get oil from Iraq. Iraq, has influence in the world in a negative way in some cases because of, Middle Eastern wars. And I represent this community in Kern County. And last I checked, my oil producers have not invaded another country. They are not destroying the Amazon rainforest or bulldozing down trees. And they're respectfully producing the oil that they're allowed to use.
You mentioned if these refineries shut down, but they plan to shut down. Is there any proposals to keep them here?
So we are working on some stuff to keep them here. I think the governor and a lot of individuals in the state of California are realizing that without these refineries, the impact to their constituents would be catastrophic and create a higher poverty level than we already have in the state. And that kind of alarmed a lot of our Democrat colleagues because they don't want gas prices to go up to $8 or $10 a gallon.
It's important to highlight how California works versus other states in the United States. California is an energy island. So we're not able to we have two choices of how to get our petroleum. One, we get it from foreign countries, as we've been talking about, or two, we have to get it from our in-state producers. And so other states don't have that issue. So California is unique in that it truly is that energy island where there's no crude petroleum pipelines coming through, so those are the two primary ways. And so what refineries want to see, what's critical to them staying and seeing that there is a future for them is the local production. If we can see energy policies shifting to be pro-local production versus pro-foreign oil, then we'll see these refineries make their investments and stay in California.
And to just, again, follow up, when you look at comparing apples to apples or oranges to oranges, you have a ship coming from Saudi Arabia that will spew 126 million metric tons of carbon emission from point of origin to point of destination, whether it comes to our Long Beach port or our Stockton port. And CARB doesn't count that. They actually take a letter from the foreign operator. So you have a foreign operator from Japan or Korea driving the ship that picks up the oil that brings it to us across our ocean and says we only use this many carbon emissions. And that's accepted as gospel. Where you ask any one of the producers that are here, any leak whatsoever, any spill whatsoever has to be reported immediately. And there's more stringent environmental controls over in-state production. The other part of the issue with the refineries is that we're going to have to do more than just provide them with production. There is a huge investment that has to be made, and you invest with states. If you're an operator or a refiner, you want to invest with states that you trust. You want to invest with the government of the state that you trust. And we have great states that allow enhanced oil production, for instance. And so why would you invest in California if you could go to Texas and you wouldn't have to worry about the entire regulatory process? I have one refinery that said it's going to cost them $750 million to do the turnaround that's due in April. If they have to invest $750 million in that state with no guarantee they'll have a ROI or return on investment on their investment, why would they do that? So there's got to be more than just the in-state production, because we have refiners that are leaving because of the cost of doing business in the state of California. Just like in the insurance industries aren't writing policies because of the risk and the way policies affect the insurance industry. You want those insurance industries to stay to make an even place for people, a competitive market for people to buy insurance. You want refineries to stay so there's a competitive market so that prices are down and when demand is high and you have fewer supply or a lower supply, then prices are going to go up. And that's the situation we find ourselves in.
How much of the state regulation is impacting these refineries shutting down?
It takes too much time to get permits. There's a lack of action taken by our agencies. And there's been numerous regulations every year being passed by the legislature. And so it's been difficult for the agencies as well to just get up to speed on what they just finished. Then they got to turn around and do it again. So there's a lot of layers of complexities there. But Senator Grove made a great point about access to capital. Why would it come to California when this is the situation where the other states have much more certainty, timely permitting, and companies and businesses are getting their permits in the local areas, and we're not. So
it takes years. It takes years to get a permit to drill in the state of California. You can get a permit to drill in Texas from the Railroad Commission in 2 days. I was talking to an operator out of Utah. He says all you do is send an email and they send it back to you in 30 minutes.
And you get a permit to drill into the ground?
And you get a permit to drill into the ground in existing fields. And in our situation, in California's situation, an operator will apply for a permit, get a notification within 10 days, which is required by law, that says thank you for your submittal, and then not hear from CalGEM for years and or months, and you have to continually fight to get information from CalGEM to try to get your permit out.
We've all been in this industry, me almost 20 years, and we've been hearing about, this potential energy cliff in California for a very long time. For so long I've been saying, we are seeing the signals, we're hearing the signals, we're hearing that you don't want us here in California. So as the senator described, why do we reinvest? And we're not planning for 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're planning many years out, and it's hard to make these hard decisions based on that. When I talk about these issues to my friends, my family, moms, in the PTA, schools, whoever it is, they never used to think about all of the things we're discussing right now. All they talk about is how much it's costing them when they fill up their car. And before, you could work it into your budget and it was up and it was down. But with everything happening right now, it is at the forefront of every California family right now. And then there's even more regulation coming their way on how many miles they might drive. So
we used to have how many refineries? It's supposed to be a conversation. How many refineries? Dozens.
32, I think. Professor Mische told me 32.
Oh, 32? So 32, and now we're down to 12? 9. We're down to 9. And California's demand has not dropped. It's dropped less than 1%. So we're putting ourselves on a catastrophic cliff. And I'm certain that our colleagues in the legislature are recognizing it. They're admitting it publicly.
And that's the hope. And, when we talk about how do we fix this, there are a lot of discussions, especially led by Senator Grove. A lot of members or legislators have said, this is my ideology, but my constituents are feeling the pain and they're willing to make changes. We have proof of that, every day happening in Sacramento. So it's got to be big changes and quick changes. But we do need that, and I think a lot of people are looking at supporting those things.
And just like Debra said, big changes and quick changes. We have a group of legislators that think that we can just fix a few things around the edges, and that's going to work, and that is not going to work. We are in a position to where if these 2 refineries go, it's over. Gas will go up, and not only that, we've got to convince them to stay and make the investment in California, knowing that if they make that huge investment, they're going to have an opportunity to make that money back after they invest that money in California.
Yeah, and if we kind of expand on that, thinking about our regular friends in the neighborhood, some have gas cars and some have electric cars. Everybody has a choice. So people get it. They're smart. And what they say is, I really want an energy transition someday. I'd like to see, full support, subsidies, whatever, in, different types of energy. But until we get there, I do believe that local production is the answer. And local production, because we have, more stringent rules, we're safer, we're cleaner, and as I mentioned before, we're investing back in our communities. We see it in schools that we support, bringing PE back, bringing tutoring to certain schools. We sponsor movies in the park, and we don't do it because of we do it because we love it. We love our community. We live there. We work there. We breathe that same air. We drink that same water. We're all environmentalists. We all want that for our kids and our family. And most Californians, when you get to talk to them in detail, they believe that as well. And when you give them a choice, do you want to import it from other countries, as Senator Grove talked about those countries, more emissions, not as clean, not as safe, no reinvestment back into our communities, or would you rather have it here until we get to a place where we have an energy transition by market and by nature, not forced?
And the data supports that. According to polls, 80% of California voters would prefer to get their oil locally sourced versus foreign countries. So they're there. That's the good news.
Now, you mentioned drilling and refineries. Can you tell us how they're connected? What is the connection between the two, if for us that we may not know how this industry works?
So we are what's called an independent local producer. We're family owned, and we operate all of the oil production in Signal Hill, or what's called the Long Beach oil field, almost all of it. So we, as producers, we have those pumping units that you see if you've been to Signal Hill or through Long Beach or the 405 freeway on the way to the airport. You'll see the pump jacks all over the hill and all over the city. We're in shopping centers, we're through parks, where our most famous one is right in a Starbucks drive-through. And it's a pumping unit that goes up and down. It pulls the oil from the ground. It goes to a special area where it is via pipeline, so none of it comes out or touches the air. Through pipeline, the oil and the water that gets produced gets separated. The water is cleaned and goes back into the ground from which it came, and the oil via pipeline is sold to refiners. So you've got three sectors there. You have the production, which we are pulling it out of the ground. Then you have the pipeline companies that transport it to the refineries, and then you have the refineries that produce it into things like transportation fuels, asphalt, and other products that Californians use every day.
And then go to just follow up with just what Debra said. So she talks about those pump jacks in the Starbucks drive-through next to, I think there's one even in a shopping center. There's one at a shopping center. Signal Hill, I think for the last 7 years, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, has measured any gases, any output from the well. The state of California just arbitrarily pulled 3,200 feet out of the air and said you can't have a production unit or a well within 3,200 feet of a sensitive zone, which would be like a Starbucks or a parking lot. So that's essentially shuts down all of the Long Beach oil production. But there's no data. If you're looking for data, they've got 7 years of scientific data to show. The Kern County EIR has 4 years of scientific data to show. Lawrence Livermore Labs didn't even agree with the 3,200 foot setback. And so I think that policies that come out of Sacramento, they're just like 3,200 feet and expect it to be able to be worked on the ground.
Well, there are political bills and then there's policy bills. And this one, it's SB 1137 is a political bill. And it was really to shut down oil production. And, we have our company and our industry has so much data to show the opposite of what that bill is saying. But what it does say is that the state is making a declaration that 3,200 feet from an oil well poses significant risks. And we have science that says otherwise.
And if you go back to the oil, it's not just the oil company. What about the home? What about the mom and the dad that worked all their life doing whatever they did to pay off their home, and now their home is in according to the state of California, an environmentally safety sensitive position? What happens to the value of that home when there's no data and no scientific evidence to show that that home is in any deeper jeopardy of any type of risk than someone who is not within 3,200 foot of an oil well?
And to add to that, this is also a ban on building housing. So the state, through its agency called HCD, has basically said California is in a housing crisis, historic housing crisis. And what this bill does now is it bans building housing into that 3,200 feet. Even though the bill doesn't say it in words, just by its declaration, why would a state or a city allow for that to happen if they truly believe that? So that's something the industry is actively working on, trying to get an amendment. We're not against regulations and against setbacks that make sense. And in fact, we've always supported smart regulations, anything that makes our industry and us better and community and state better, we absolutely support.
But one of the benefits of local production is there's a significant amount of people who are royalty owners, who own their minerals, they are in the community, and they get regular monthly checks based off of the production. And that income is very significant. And in a time where affordability is a big issue, for Californians, these checks that they're getting from local production that they wouldn't get from energy policies that are promoting more foreign oil and decreasing our local production, those are directly negatively impacting regular Californians every day that we're not producing. And so Senate Bill 1137, that impacts our communities, that impacts the royalty owners. The government is taking away their rights to their minerals. And they are standing up and saying, enough's enough, that's illegal. And so it is being litigated. A couple royalty owners out of the city of Long Beach have stepped forward and are bringing a challenge to this situation. And so I think I just wanted to bring that up because I think the royalty owners get missed in this benefit of local production.
So
and the more we produce
here.
locally, the more that they that our residents around us are benefiting from our production.
And the word royalty makes it sound like it's a lot of wealthy people that are getting a paycheck from the industry so that they can produce oil. But a lot of times the oil producer, does not own the land in which they produce on. So they'll go to you and say, hey, we found oil on your property. If we can produce it, and the person who owns the property will get a check for the production. A lot of these royalty owners are retirees, are individuals who were, a lot of them are.
Widows. The biggest demographic is elderly and widows.
Yeah, see, and so imagine just getting, a check every month for the production on their property. Again, under the safest, most environmentally stringent regulations in the entire world, right here in the state of California. Now those people are being denied their right to do something on their property. It's kind of like if you live in San Francisco, Los Angeles, or whatever, it's the same thing, that you have to go through so much process to build something on your own property. We have the right to build stuff on our property. We have the right to access the water on our property under the Constitution. We have the right to produce minerals on our property. And for the state of California to come in and say, no, you can't do that with your property, it denies us as Californians property rights. When I go to Texas or Arizona or other places, they're like, oh, we live in the free United States of America, because they really do say that. When I go back to Washington, D.C., hi, I'm Senator Grove from California. Oh, we're ABC. I'm like, ABC, anything but California. Because of the restrictions, we have less freedoms in the state of California regarding our own private property rights. Think about a company like EMB Natural Resources, who is sitting on a vast ability to create cheaper, more reliable, safe produced energy, or Signal Hill that's sitting right here. And they're denied that from the state of California, which causes costs to go up for our constituents and people in California. Why would the governor not want to create abundance, allow oil production here to drive down gas prices, and to allow people to thrive, to invest back into our state, to the things that Debra just said that we invest in as good community partners?
Now, how much of this do you think is the public opinion of oil and gas, and how much of it is politics? Because policymakers, from what we've gathered, lawmakers are voting because the interest in their district, saying, I don't like oil. 60% of people may not like it. How much of it is that?
The most, and please jump in, but most of the legislators that are making the bills that are anti-oil are living in coastal cities and coastal communities. And all you have to do is, I don't blame them. They are doing what, they believe their districts want. The other interesting part is that we don't hear much of the community talking about all the details of this. The loud ones are the ones that are going to Sacramento and they're saying, this is what California feels, this is what California believes, and we need to shut down oil production. The rest of the state is at their kids' soccer games, they're making dinner, they're making plans to see their grandparents, they're busy with work, and they're living their lives. They're not at the city council meetings yelling, hey, what about me, what about me? I support this. I can't afford an electric car. I can't afford to sit an hour in between jobs to charge. I'm barely making it right now. But that's changing, and it's changing, and we saw it in this past election. So many people changed their votes on affordability and what they're calling kitchen table issues and kitchen table discussions.
And Kern County being the number one oil producing county, when you do the numbers on Kern County that work in the oil industry, it's 55% people of color, 12% women, I believe 18% United States military veteran. But we have almost 40% second chancers. The oil industry is a place where individuals, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say they want second chancers, formerly incarcerated, to be able to come and survive and be good, productive members of society. The oil industry is one of the very few industries that I know that will take somebody, and as long as you have soft skills, meaning if you can show up for work on time and we can teach you how to do a job, you can turn that individual fresh out of prison to $100,000+ a year job in no time. Jerry Flores started on a weed crew. Within a couple of years, he worked for EMB Natural Resources, I believe for almost 12 or 13 years. He was transferring, moving oil through the pipelines, learned how to operate all the equipment. This is somebody that dropped out of high school, got involved in gangs, went to prison, got out of prison, started working in the oil fields on a weed crew, showed up every day, got promoted. got promoted, learned a skill in a trade, and they made over $100,000 a year transferring the fuel. And those jobs are gone now because just if you don't want to answer this question, I just took over your show, huh?
No, it's
Sorry.
perfect. No, that's great. No, yeah.
How many employees did you guys lose? How many employees have left, or you guys had to let go of EMB Natural Resources, a great company offering 401ks, excellent benefits, retirement, great wages, company vehicles? How many people lost their jobs because of the impacts that California had on you?
I can't say it hasn't impacted us, because it has, and that's been probably the saddest point for our company's history, is just we care about every single person's job, and we fight for that every day. And it's not just them, it's their families. One of the proudest things for our company is the second chance opportunities that we do have for career paths for individuals. The formerly incarcerated is a great one. People that never thought that there was another opportunity in life to have a second chance. And the oil field and EMB has been a pathway for them. And we're really proud of that. And if we're ready to get back to work and do more for Californians. And that's just one example of one of the benefits of local production.
And I've had single women come to my office, that have come up on oil field work days. Can you save my job? I was a FOTEP woman. I was a single woman. I was trying to make ends meet as a receptionist, but I got a job and I took a welding class, and now they're welding and making, they're buying a home, and their kids are going to, cheerleading, and they were able to pay for things and extracurricular activities because it's an excellent field to be in. It's multi-craft every day, all day.
So gas is not a luxury item, and it's not something, I think one of the Berkeley students that is here in the audience today, they said something that really resonated with me, which is gasoline and energy for Californians. It's not Democratic, it's not Republican. It is for Californians, for all Californians. And when we talk about energy policy in Sacramento, it shouldn't be what one party believes or what another party believes. It should be available to every single Californian, and at a price that is affordable and in a way that's reliable. And if they want to get into the cleanest and the less emissions and the human rights and all of that, California is still the #1 place to produce it.
We also decided to talk to some of these experts about innovation in this space. While a lot of people look at green energy, a lot of people in the oil and gas space are innovating as well, but they are not in the spotlight with the media. So we decided to talk to them about what they're doing for the community and what type of innovations they have in this space.
There's also innovations that oil companies are doing that actually are complementary to the transition. And one thing that I think is an important message for industry to continue to try and convey is that we are not opposed to a transition. There have been fuel transitions throughout centuries. And so if this is one, and if there's a better product that has less impact and is more economic for the consumers, then that's great. We support that. But in the meantime, we have a product that is continuing to be used by a lot of people in this state. Well, actually everybody in this state, and it's a product that even if all of the cars go away in 2035 or 2045, we're still going to need 400,000 barrels a day of crude oil to make all of the other products besides what's burned in automobiles. And so if we look back over 10, 20, 30 years, whatever, you will see that there is a continuing history of innovation in industry as we have learned how to do things better, cheaper, more environmentally responsible. I think a very good example of that is 50 years ago in Kern County, crude oil was being burned in steam generators. The emissions were way higher than they are now. And now you have numerous new generations of very low emission burners that you have to use in Kern County. And that is one good aspect of regulation, is that the regulations that we have are very significant. We know that. But they also provide our industry with a good housekeeping seal of approval, because we have a lot of people from agencies that watch very closely what we do and make sure that we're adhering to the very strict rules that are in place. And because of that, we are the producers of oil with the lowest environmental impact anywhere where oil is being produced.
And you know, just a lot of people may not know that's watching is that I looked when Steve mentioned, you know, a byproduct, like things that we'd still need 400,000 barrels to produce stuff. Your glasses come as a byproduct of petroleum. Those shoes that you have on, your jacket probably is a polysynthetic. I just think about all the stuff, heart valves, almost everything plastic inside of a hospital, whether it's an IV bag or anything, that's all a petroleum byproduct. And it made me kind of laugh because I had gotten an article when we were producing, or when we were trying to tell people the benefits of petroleum byproducts. There was a study that Lego, people that have Legos or that own the Lego brand, spent millions upon millions of dollars trying to find something that would replace the magic product. They wouldn't say oil, but it's oil, and they couldn't find anything. So Legos would have disappeared if we weren't able to use a petroleum byproduct and produce petroleum. And it was just funny that was something that came to mind. But when he mentioned, you know, the various byproducts, I just looked around the stage and I looked at the table and I looked at the flooring, and there's a tremendous amount of oil that we are all sitting under that we use every day, not including, you know, mention our iPhones, all of those things.
There are companies, and probably Signal Hill is one, that have something in common with E&B, is that we have discovered that an old adage is true, and that is the best place to look for oil is in an old oil field. There are studies that have been done about California that indicate that maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% or so of the original oil in place in California has been produced. Well, if my math is right, that means 80% is left. There's a lot left to go after, and just real quickly, I will give example, real life example for E&B. We have a field called Poso Creek that sits outside of Kern, Bakersfield a little ways, and we acquired that a little over 20 years ago, and began very slowly, because the price of oil at that time was closer to 10 than it was 20, to do things on the field. Did some work on existing wells, and production came up a little bit. Did some more work, and it came up more. And when we started, that field was making about 200 barrels a day. Well, we went through about 15 years of development that included installing thermal recovery operations, but it also included drilling horizontal wells, all of these things being technological advances either in the technique or itself being a new technique or the improvement of an existing technique. And right before COVID, that field peaked, going from 200 barrels a day to 11,000 barrels a day. That is in a field that was all but dead. It was in a field that had been left by the majors, and there were very few wells producing when we acquired it. And so from that point forward, because of COVID, because of capital restrictions in California and the ups and downs in the industry, lack of permits, our production has declined significantly in Poso Creek. We are making around 6,000 barrels a day now. But we have a ton of additional development to do, and we could ramp production up to more than 11,000 barrels a day if we could get the permits to do it.
And nothing in these two companies, sorry, but nothing, I know a little bit about both of them, mostly about E&B, nothing goes to waste. So even the water that they bring up that they clean, they give it to the farmers when we have drought areas so that they can continue to grow the food that we use. There's other things. They capture the gas and it goes back into power the plant. They put up solar. So, and I know Signal Hill does all those things too. So nothing these energy companies do or these producers do gets lost in the translation. They take everything, they use it all. Unlike operators that produced in Ecuador where they just release it into the streams, contaminate the rivers, all the things that go on in foreign countries, nothing they do escapes any regulatory issue, and they capture and don't waste anything.
Well, thank you, Shannon. That's true. I think that's true of E&B. I think that's true of most California operators, that everybody's very focused on being kind and friendly to our neighborhood and our planet, but particularly Signal Petroleum, we recycle and reuse 2.1 million gallons of water every day. We generate our own electricity. The water we recycle is enough to water for 7,000 homes. We generate our own electricity, and the electricity that we generate from our own field gas is the equivalent of the power requirement for 10,000 homes. But in that, with Steve talking about the Poso field, we're seeing what's happening in California is that our oil production is declining, but it's not reservoir decline. It's regulatory strangulation. Take the strangulation off, and there's a lot of capacity there for our industry to bounce back and even grow. Part of the innovation is new technology and morphing new technology so it's effective in areas that it really hadn't been used before, like 3D seismic imaging. We've acquired, we morphed it. We have high-quality imaging, and we're drilling discovery wells in a 105-year-old oil field based on that technology. And there's literally millions, if not billions, of barrels in and around our holdings. But in the Los Angeles Basin in general, USGS estimates there's 15 billion barrels recoverable, still to be found there. So we're doing what we do. We adapt to what the conditions around us. We adapt to the regulatory environment. We keep embracing technology to make our operations more efficient and cleaner. And we are going to be here for California's needs today, but tomorrow and in the future when California maybe needs more oil than what we use today.
I'll add one thing. David mentioned about the reservoirs in California and the decline rates, which is a very, very different decline rate. It's much more shallow than the decline rate where all of the oil production growth in the United States has come from, and that's the shale plays. The Permian Basin produces about 4.4 million barrels of oil from the shales a day. They drill tens of thousands of wells a year, and that has caused quite a bit of growth in production over the years and made the United States one of the largest oil producer in the world. But look at what's happened in California with permits for drilling. In 2022 and 2023, there were 100 permits issued for drilling new wells in California. Back in 2018, there may be 2,000 or 3,000 permits a year. Well, if you applied that level of permit restriction to the Permian Basin, where they are producing 4 million barrels a day of shale oil, as I said, that production would decline by over 2 million barrels a year. That is the difference. So they have to drill a massive number of wells to continue to produce at the rate that they are producing now. In California, even though we haven't been able to to drill wells, our production's down, but it is down a fraction of what it would be if our oil was not as sustainable as our oil was as it is when compared to what's going on in Texas.
Shannon, Steve's hitting on something that I look at frequently or think about often, which is the fact that in 2017 or 2018, there were more proved reserves in Kern County than the entire state of Colorado. If we go back a few more years, in 2013, Kern County was the largest producing oil county in the lower 48 onshore. The largest producing county was Kern County. We are the national leader. And furthermore, California as a whole, if you look at proved oil reserves, which are reserves that we've proved we can get to them with modern technology today. And then you look at what's happened in Texas, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and you see both the production and the reserves hockey stick up as they've been allowed to permit drilling, as they've been allowed to deploy technology, which has brought economic windfall to these states. And the opposite is happening in California. And we hear from those that want to shut down the industry, we're out of oil. From an expert level, all of us are saying it's actually the opposite. If we just embrace this industry, we can work our way out of this budget deficit. We can bring tens of thousands of jobs back. We can lower gasoline prices, grocery prices, all of it's interconnected, as we've heard. Is that anywhere in the conversation with your colleagues in Sacramento?
We do have several conversations regarding that. The problem that I think we face the most is that we have legislators in the control of the legislative process that believe in scarcity and government subsidies, and what they do is they tend to they overregulate an industry, which they're doing with the oil industry. They talked about an additional tax for roads and infrastructure instead of, they just look at things differently. Instead of unleashing this incredible industry that would allow us to have abundance, like abundance in revenues, abundance in solving the budget prices, abundance in the reduction of cost at the grocery store, because everything is associated with fuels and transportation cost. That, and if you're a farmer, water, right? So they preach scarcity all the time, but it's creating poverty in our state. And we have the highest homeless population, unsheltered in the entire United States of America. Things like that could be solved. It was mentioned earlier on the earlier panel, and I didn't pick up on it till just now when you mentioned something else, is that the industry gives back to the community. Steve mentioned our EIR that takes, mitigates when you apply for a permit. They'll reduce our carbon cap and trade. They'll reduce and have a lower carbon emission offset for something else. Well, with our Kern County EIR, we offset clean air buses for our schools, for our churches, solar panels on our parking lots at schools to help offset some of the utility grid issues. Kern County is the energy capital of the world, not with just energy, not with just oil, but there's 58 counties in the state of California, and we produce 53% of the solar and wind. 53%, over half of the state's solar and wind, and then 70% of the state's fuel. If you would unleash Kern County and you would apply that EIR, that program EIR that mitigates it down to almost zero carbon emissions, that has a lot of EJ group support and allowed individual jurisdictions like, Signal Hill, for the local jurisdiction to adopt that EIR to produce, it would be by far, we already are the cleanest, but it would be 100-fold times that if we could make that happen and just unleash our communities to do this.
I love the topic of co-production, which you're saying we produce the most renewables, we produce the most oil and gas. In Signal Hill's case, you're co-producing homes. As I look at the history of Signal Hill and how the operations have condensed in terms of oil and gas, but then the community has blossomed around the operations.
In Signal Hill, we have had the opportunity to be a major real estate developer, especially housing, and run a giant oil field it compatibly together. And some with the technology we talked about a few minutes ago, and the other with just smart operating practices. We are able to enjoy operating an oil and gas company as a neighbor to commercial retail and housing and other uses at the same time. In the company's recent history, we have built 550 new single-family homes. We're under development right now on 300 units of affordable housing too. We have built 660,000 square feet of commercial retail, almost 2 million feet of industrial, and we've grown the oil field at the same time. And so those opportunities exist in the urban area, and in our urban areas we have tremendous future potential for oil and gas, but that can be compatible with the development and the uses of the surface and bringing more housing, which we all know is sorely needed in our state.
We should always remember there are over 40 military bases in California that rely on jet fuel and other fuel produced in California refineries, and it's probably not a good idea to supply them with the same fuel from China. The best asset that we have on our side, science and the facts. We aren't afraid of them. I mean, we want to know if there's something that is happening with how we do things that's not good, then we won't do it. We'll figure out another way. The industry has done that, and will continue to do that. And the thing that really is important for people to remember is crude oil production funds innovation, and innovation can mean we're gonna do it with we're going to do the same thing with a lower carbon footprint. We're going to be able to produce more oil. We're going to be able to lower the cost. But you got to have crude oil production to fund that innovation.
I'll take that opportunity to talk about what we're building, which is geologic thermal energy storage. And people have asked me, we've been the recipient of a $6 million federal award through the Department of Energy, Solar Energy Technology Office. And one of the things the state agencies have asked us as we've gone through the permitting, they've said, well, you're doing this in an oil field. Are you going to produce oil? And we said, well, yeah, we do it. We do it in the reservoir because by virtue of the fact the oil's been trapped there over millennia, we have a geologic container. In other words, we know when we put the thermal energy in the oil reservoir, it's contained by faulting and the geologic characteristics because the oil's been trapped there. So yes, we're going to produce oil. Well, are you going to sell it? Well, yeah, once we get it out of the ground, what else are we going to do with it? And by the way, our technology, which again is a bipartisan technology awarded under the Biden administration, the oil pays for the infrastructure, the clean new technology. The oil pays for that. And so people have asked me, well, are you worried about, President Trump, canceling the IRA? And I said, no, the most important thing we need is the permits. And after that, and that's the difference you're going to find with oil companies doing truly economic projects is we don't need the subsidy. We're not dependent on that. We're saying, hey, we plow the profits of the oil production back into creating a cleaner technology, a better technology that actually aligns with everything Sacramento is telling us they want. Yet the permit is the hardest thing that we can get.
That's evident by all the panels that we've had today. Part of me, I don't want to get cynical sometimes, but part of me is like, if it was about carbon emissions, like if it really was about reducing carbon emissions in the atmosphere, and like I said earlier, if you took a ship that was 126 million metric tons to come across, and there's several of them, that's just one, across our ocean, and then you got me hooked on vesselfinder.com, right, where they do ship-to-ship transfers and all this stuff from just crazy stuff that goes on out in our oceans. But if you take that ship and then you weigh it compared to what the carbon intensity is for us to do in-state oil production, by far we are less carbon intensive. So if it was really about that, why aren't we unleashing in-state production? Because it is by far less carbon intensive, and it's been proven. You have studies, there's been studies from Lawrence Livermore Lab, there's been studies from many of our national labs that say the exact same thing, and they just refuse to do it. But yet they'll empower these foreign countries or this transfer of oil from country to country and increase our supply chain. And it makes no sense when you have all the data and all the science. Like Steve said, we welcome the science. We have it. We just talked about, we import stuff from Mexico, and they do not have the same food quality that we have. It doesn't make any sense. California is the best. I wish California could be turned into a natural resource state. Whether it's cement, whether it's natural gas, whether it's oil, anything that the earth creates, California has a vast resource of. And soda ash, anything, borax, the borax plant, all of that stuff, if we would just unleash our state to produce natural resources that are here for a long, long time, we could benefit the entire world, and not only our state, but the nation and the world.
we're not the problem, we're the solution. And I really do think there are a lot of people that don't like the oil industry, but really don't know why. It's just the thing to do. And when they come and take tours at Signal Hill and the drill sites we have in Los Angeles, we do regularly bring people that want to see what's going on, and we let them do that. And it's a good thing because, as Dave said, almost everybody that goes through and sees what we do and see how clean it is, and they're not gasping for air when they don't smell anything, they walk away with a totally different idea of what's going on. So we can't be afraid of interacting. We need to do more of it, and we need to interact with everybody, even those that don't like us, especially those that don't like us and really can't explain why.
I think that's a great point, and I think one thing I learned last week, I live in San Diego, and I brought my wife and kids to our lease for the first time because it is so remote and it's so far removed that there's no reason anybody would ever go out there unless you're building something. And so in our case, I've invited any reporter that wants to come, anybody in the public, hey, I'll pick you up, we'll drive out, even further out than Lost Hills. It's named Lost Hills for a reason. It's out there. And the one thing my wife said to me, and she's a surfer, we're all environmentalists, we're all born and raised in California, we want to stay here, we don't want to leave the state. And she said, you got to make a video out here. I said, that's funny because I kind of have done a lot of those. And she said, people need to realize that, you're so far out here, there's nothing out here. And I think what you're saying is exactly right, Steve, is we need to be able to engage with everybody, because when people actually see a facility, whether it's in an urban setting or whether it's in the remote area of West Kern County, people walk away with a very different perspective. It's impossible not to. I would say if someone that has never been to a facility came away with the same impression that they came with, they're lying to you, because it is an industry that is fascinating in terms of the technology that's deployed, the care we have for the environment. And one thing I'll say, and then I'll stop if anybody else has closing remarks, but when we're on campus as Californians for Energy and Science, and we go to campuses like UC Berkeley, we ask the kids directly. Someone made the point earlier that most of the students have a very open mind in this generation. And we say, look, this is an industry that no matter what field you're studying, if it's geosciences, if it's electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, petroleum engineering, this is the industry that's going to pay you $120,000 a year, probably in your first couple of years. And then you're going to work up from there. Where are you going to go get a job when you're out of school, when you graduate here, if California is shutting down critical industries? And that's been one of the most effective things that I've been able to stumble upon, is just asking those basic questions of how do you view an industry, where are you going to go to work, what are you going to do? Because we're all Californians, and we want to see this state succeed.
We're not just fighting for the company, we're fighting for the community, we're fighting for our employees. And that's one of the great things we do tours is to let our operators walk people through the facility and talk about what we do and how we do it, how proud they are. But our communities too. We give back a lot, and we want to continue doing that. But we have a fight on our hands, facts and science. We need to double down our efforts, and at the end of the day, we are going to turn the tide and continue to produce that abundant, affordable energy, very clean.
Let us know what you think of this energy forum and discussion. Do you think we should pay more attention to the oil and gas infrastructure in California? Or do you think the route we're in is good? You can always email us at siamak@californiainsider.com or comment. We read all of your emails and comments. I'm Siamak Khorrami. This is California Insider, and we'll see you next time.